I have the pleasure of working very closely with Alan Matheson, the Executive Director of The Point. We have Alan here today to speak to the active transportation and proactive planning of transportation at the prison site redevelopment in Draper, which is Utah's generational opportunity and one of the most significant economic and quality of life opportunities in state history. So what's the point? Like I say, active transportation in Utah's generational community. We will hear from the executive director of The Point today. Before we start, we wanted to recognize and thank our summit partners. Without their support, today's event would not be possible, so thank you. Alan Matheson is the executive director of The Point. In this capacity, he's charged with preparing for and overseeing the development of approximately 600 acres of state-owned land known as The Point. Director Matheson previously served the state of Utah as executive director of the Utah Department of Environmental Quality, senior environmental policy advisor to Governor Gary Herbert, and state planning coordinator. So with that, I will kick it to Alan for the presentation. Again, thank you, Alan, for joining us today.
Thanks, Muriel. I appreciate very much the introduction. And I've got to say, Muriel's been one of our key partners on this project. She and her team have been very involved in our outreach efforts, communications efforts. And as you know, on a project like this, that's pretty essential. We want to make sure that what we're doing really reflects public input. I think many of you are familiar with what we're trying to do here, but I'm going to start by sharing a video we've put together that gives kind of a broad overview. And from there, we'll jump into some more detail.
Most people in the state know that the existing correctional facility at the point of the mountain is going to be moved, which means that this land is going to be available for development.
In the not too distant future, this area will be turned into a leading community focused on innovation, a place that people in Utah can be proud of.
We brought together all sorts of stakeholders from the surrounding communities and throughout the state, the public sector and the private sector, and we want to make sure that Utahns have a voice.
We've had open houses, we've had surveys, and in all, we've brought 10,000 members of our community together to give public ideas, and we've incorporated them into the plan. Things like this river-to-range greenway that connects regional trails, gathering places where people can come and enjoy parks and open space, where they can go to concerts. People wanted a place that was sensitive to the environment.
The Point's a glimpse into the future. The best buildings, the best kind of development. It's hopefully our best minds, our best thoughts, our best plans to provide for the future of our community.
We've hired some of the finest planners in the world. I fully anticipate that this project, The Point, will be known globally and loved locally. And I'm truly excited about what this will mean for our state.
Well, thanks to all of you for your interest in this project. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you. This has been a project that really is a community effort, and again, appreciate your interest and willingness to engage. So you're familiar with the site, currently occupied by the Utah State Prison in Draper. It's about 600 acres and really unique. I don't think I realized how special this site was when I started this project. But as we've talked to people around the country, around the world, we see that it has a number of elements that you just don't find in many places. I mean, the most obvious initially is just it's in a beautiful setting. It's also between two of the fastest growing metropolitan regions in the country, great labor shed. It's served by really high quality transportation and will be even more in the future as we look to building transit through this site. It's in the heart of Silicon Slopes, vibrant high-tech community. And all of these pieces fit together to create what will be kind of a blank slate, allowing us in Utah to do some things that I think will benefit our state, our residents for a long time to come. This is a project that was started by the legislature, and the statute that creates the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority, the entity that I'm involved with, also outlines a number of objectives for this project. And these objectives all came from public process, from a group called the Point of the Mountain Development Commission that used Envision Utah and others to host workshops and studies, and thousands of people outlined what they wanted to see in the Point of the Mountain area. The legislature took those ideas and plugged them directly into the statute, which I think says a lot. You can see these standards here: job creation, workforce development, importantly, high quality of life, not just on the site, but in surrounding areas. Growth that would be a mix of commercial and residential, that considers affordability and matches the needs of the workforce. Looking at natural areas for preservation, having recreational opportunities. Sustainability and health are really critical. Improving air quality, reducing resource use like water and energy. Then, most relevant to today's discussion is a future-focused transportation infrastructure. Talks about world-class transit and ensuring that we can get people around and protect our environment. Being complementary to what's happening in other parts of this region. And interestingly, the legislature directed us to look at a nationally recognized research center, ways that we can expand the knowledge base in our community and beyond. So who's involved in this? I mentioned the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority. It's got 11 members on the board, all with a commitment to the state of Utah. And the co-chairs are our Lieutenant Governor, Deidre Henderson, and Representative Lowry Snow from Washington County. And I think this is interesting that both of the co-chairs are from outside of Salt Lake County. I think that speaks to their commitment, but it also speaks to the statewide nature of this project. It's really designed to provide statewide benefits. The other members of the board include a total of 4 legislators, 2 local mayors, the heads of a couple of key state agencies, private sector, and the Commissioner of Higher Education, that again, I think reflects the importance of education at this site. Our board has adopted some guiding principles, touch points that we look at when we make important decisions. And the first and certainly foremost is promote the public interest. The idea here is that this is a site owned by the people of Utah. We need to ensure that there's a benefit to those people, economic as well as in terms of quality of life. Setting the standard just means we want this to be a model community. Utah is growing fast, fastest growing state in the country over the last 10 years. And there are legitimate concerns about what that growth means to our quality of life. And we believe that this can be a site where we can demonstrate approaches, planning ideas, technologies that can help us preserve what we value as we grow. Thinking regionally just means that we can't look just within the borders of this site. It's important that we consider the impact on surrounding communities. So as we develop ideas for retail, how does it impact the economic opportunities in surrounding communities? What happens with traffic, et cetera? Taking the long view, and that is, we've got a little advantage as a state project in that we don't need to meet a quarterly profit goal. We can be a little bit more patient. And while we certainly want to see returns, we want to see this done right over the long term and create benefits for people for decades to come. So we can be patient, wait for the market to catch up with the vision, and make sure that we do this right. And then a couple of process points. One, being open and transparent. Everything we do is live streamed, recorded, available to the public. We want people to be involved, and we certainly are committed to acting with integrity. I mentioned this public involvement piece that's so important. Over the last year, we've involved over 10,000 Utahns in this process through open houses and workshops, public meetings. We've had 5 working groups that are composed of experts in Utah in various areas, from land use and infrastructure to environment and air quality to innovation, education, research, economic development. They've provided really outstanding input in what we've done. Those working groups, with feedback from the public, identified kind of the pillars of our planning effort, what we call our key vision elements. Wanting to have a community that's iconic, mixed use, vibrant, focused on healthy living, place of activity and connection. Transit, we want a multimodal transportation system, future focused, gets people around. Economic growth, we're trying to attract best jobs, best opportunities, best talent, and create revenues for the people of the state. Innovation, it's got to be a place where, again, we bring talent together, provide research opportunities, solve the problems that we face in our community. Sustainability, a place that's developed in ways that perform much better than traditional development in water use, in terms of emissions, lower carbon emissions, and ways that we can be more sustainable in this beautiful state. Collaboration, we're going to work closely with those around us and make sure that we are partners with the regional agencies like the MPOs, the transportation agencies, as well as the local communities. So last year, we had an outstanding planning partner, Skidmore, Owens and Merrill, or SOM, oversee a planning effort that resulted in the release of a framework plan for this site. It's called a framework because while it gives us very clear direction, it also is flexible. We recognize that things are going to change over time, and that we'll need to be able to adjust to those changes in the market and technologies and the way people want to live. But this site is designed as an innovation community. All aspects of it are designed in ways that bring people together, where ideas can be shared, a place that would attract great talent, people who want to live here and work here at all levels of the economic spectrum, an innovation district. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of these things. One of the real distinguishing features of this site is that it's designed as a 15-minute city. This is a concept that is not new in history, but it's kind of new in terms of being a planning element in the modern world. The mayor of Paris is really pushing this, and Paris is doing some things to build out elements of that great city as 15-minute cities, meaning a place where you can access the main needs of your life within a 15-minute walk where you live. We believe that this may be the first intentional 15-minute city being designed now in the country, and certainly the first in Utah. This site is perfectly designed for that because it's just about a square mile, which is just perfect for that 15-minute walk. This is the illustrative plan. I'm just going to point out a few things on it. One that you can see is this diagonal river to range trail, kind of moving from northwest to southeast. That'll connect the Jordan River Parkway to the regional trails on the east side of I-15, connecting again hundreds of miles of regional trails. Really an important commuting route, great recreational route. It'll be a welcoming place. You'll see this north-south boulevard that's designed as a boulevard that's walkable, appealing, lots of landscaping, little parkways in the middle, be able to move people, but also be a welcoming gateway into this project. There's a central area, the hub, that is retail and entertainment and residential and office around a central park. And parks are a big part of this. In fact, about a quarter of the development is in greenways and parks. And while there's this I think, aspirational planning goal that many communities have of having a park and natural areas within a 10-minute walk of every resident. At this site, there will be green space and parks within a 2-minute walk of every resident and every employee. An innovation district at the bottom and connections throughout the site so you can get around without getting on a road. This shows other aspects of that framework plan. You can see how it's integrated with the transit system. Two transit stations, one on the north end of that central park and one kind of southeast along the River to Range Trail. Making sure that uses are mixed is important. And this site has some constraints on it that make it a little tougher to fully mix the different uses, but you can see here the blues are more of the office, reds are commercial retail, the yellows and browns are different types of residential. So while right along the freeway it makes more sense to have office than retail, we've tried, or residential, tried to mix the residential throughout this site. We know that planning and site development is really, as Jeff Speck said, the first stop in making sure that we can have a successful mobility system. So I'm going to focus today primarily on mobility and how we anticipate getting people through this site and connecting with surrounding areas. We talked earlier about the key vision elements, and that one of them is based on our mobility system. From that general element and goal, we pulled out various principles that we think are important. Things like regional traffic reduction, emission reduction, pedestrian priority. And then with our working groups, identified a number of very specific things that could be done to advance those principles. We'll talk about some of those today. We've coined this term a one-car community. This idea that although you can have as many vehicles as you want, we'd like it to be a place where you don't need a car. And if you do, maybe you have one car for those weekend trips, or if one member of the family has to commute off-site. But we're doing as much as possible to minimize the needs for cars. So this site can be accessed off of the Front Runner system. The Draper Front Runner station is nearby. There will be future transit, as we've talked about, that will connect that Front Runner station through the point, over I-15 and down into Lehigh and Utah County. In the legislative session this last couple of weeks, the legislature identified this expansion of transit through the Point of the Mountain area as a real priority, and has designated it as a priority for now UDOT to develop that capital project. They've also directed that we relook at rail as an option for this transit. UTA had previously selected bus rapid transit as a preferred scenario. Now we're going to again take a harder look at the potential for rail, because I think there are some new technologies that might meet the engineering challenges on the site and might be less expensive than some of what has been explored in the past. Once you get into the site, and I'll talk about these more, we're looking at an internal circulator that would get everyone within a 5-minute walk of any place on the site, micro-mobility strategies, walkable mixed-use streets that are appealing. So we'll dive into those a little bit more. Also, as part of this urban design, we're looking at these kind of 5-minute districts, places where you can walk within 5 minutes from residential to office to commercial and retail. And having a porous, tight grid system that makes it easier for people to get around, smaller blocks. We've talked a little bit about the transit, and I'll just show you. I mentioned that the transit would come from the Draper Front Runner station down through the Point of the Mountain with 2 transit stops, and then across I-15 and down into Lehigh. connecting to an internal circulator system. We're designing transit-oriented development around those two transit stops, places of greater density, places that are real activity centers, close to the entertainment district, to the key offices, the Central Park, the River to Range Trail, the Innovation District. Now, it's probably won't be shocking to you that when they developed the state prison, they weren't thinking very much about access. So right now, one of our challenges is getting access into and egress from the site. And we're working closely on our planning, along with UDOT and surrounding communities, to provide additional access points into the site. And that's a challenge, but it's also a real opportunity, again, to create some porosity in that development. And I want to point out that pink area there that doesn't have a lot of roads through it. That's an area that we're looking at as a pedestrian priority zone. And while the entire site will be designed with pedestrians in mind, this is an area that won't have through streets. It'll be accessible for deliveries and freight. It'll be accessible for first responders, but it really is a place where pedestrians can get around without a lot of conflict with vehicles. Should feel safe and welcoming, places for gathering, for community events. Again, tying in with the sub-regional transportation projects is going to be really important. We're working closely with the MPOs and with UDOT on looking at the design of the regional or sub-regional road system, ways that people can get in and use this connection from Bangor Highway at 6th West down Porter Rockwell Boulevard to 146 South. They're looking at connections on 2nd West here that'll go over or under Bangor and connect into South Jordan. The freeway system with one-way frontage roads and Texas turnabouts, very similar to what you see in Lehigh now, that'll facilitate, again, ingress and egress, but also moving regional traffic through the point of the mountain area. This is all going to be really important that it be coordinated for those broader goals of mobility and quality of life and economic benefit. So I talked a little bit earlier about some of the strategies for smart mobility, and I'll go into these. We've talked a bit about the circulator, micro-mobility, just meaning, opportunities for e-bikes and e-scooters and ways that you can get around easily on the site. A car sharing system, where we'll have a fleet of vehicles that can be rented for short-term, so that if you don't have a car but need one, you can certainly get one easily and use it for the day or however long you need it. Mobility hubs are little areas around the site where mobility options converge. They'll help with wayfinding, allow you to access the micro-mobility options and the car sharing. And then mobility as a service. We're developing an app that will educate those who visit or work or live at the site on what the mobility options are, where you can access them, how long it will take you to get to where you want to go using those different methodologies. It'll you'll be able to pay for these things all in one place and include discounts for using that app. So again, the circulator system, we think ultimately it can be autonomous, probably not initially, but on a dedicated right-of-way. So it's not competing with vehicle traffic. Connections to both of the transit stations. And again, promoting one-car community, transit ridership, and convenience. This might be the kind of vehicle that we might see early on. Again, moving around this circulator system. Active transportation and micromobility. We're designing streets so that they can accommodate walkability, biking, scooters, etc. Many of them dedicated just to those active transportation mobilities, so separated from vehicles. Much of this is to facilitate that first mile, last mile that makes it easier to use transit. This shows kind of a circulator plan connecting some of the bike and pedestrian routes. You'll see those yellow circles, there are 31 of them. Those are places where on-street bicycle trails connect with non-vehicle or non-motorized vehicle trails. So again, promotes permeability and makes it easy to get around the site without ever getting on a road if you want. This is a rendering of what some of those pedestrian and bicycle and micromobility paths could look like. Again, they'd be welcoming places, safe places, allowing you to access the key areas of the site without getting on a road. And there's some important environmental pieces on that too, addressing stormwater through the greenways. So we capture that stormwater on site, use less infrastructure. So this is the trail network. The main element of that, as I mentioned before, is this river to range trail that will connect regional destinations. I just love the idea of somebody working at this site and maybe at lunchtime being able to go down, jump on their bike, ride the bike over I-15, access the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, get into Corner Canyons with those wonderful mountain biking trails in Draper, get a good workout, clear the brain, ride back, and have an afternoon at work. So those kinds of opportunities are going to be available at this site. This again shows, all of the area on the site that's within 1/8 of a mile of a high quality pedestrian or bicycle trail. And you can see that it's about 98% of the site. So easy to access these recreational opportunities, these active mobility opportunities. Talked a little bit about car share. This gives you a little more detail on these short-term rentals. We'd place them throughout the site so that they're in different districts, and the number of cars would be based on the projected use. But we're looking at kind of 100 to 120 vehicles that would be on the site. Again, advancing those goals of one-car community, driving less, improving traffic mobility, and lowering household transportation costs. We put those mobility hubs that I talked about throughout the site in areas that they could be easily accessed. More than 90% of the site would be within a 5-minute walk of one of those mobility hubs. And again, you can get there, find your way around the property, access the micromobility options, the circulator, and again, promote that park once concept. If people are going to drive into the site, they don't need to drive around the site once they park. There's that mobility as a service piece that I talked about, where again, you can see on that depiction on the right, you can really put in a destination. It'll show you how much time it'll take using different modes, where you can access them, how you can save money and get the most convenient and least expensive transportation options at the site. So those are the ideas, but one of the questions is, how do you evaluate them? How do we decide what mix makes the most sense at this site? And so this is something that I want to emphasize. It may be a little detailed, and I won't go into great granularity on this, but I do want you to get a sense of the kind of analysis that we're going through. We have consultants on smart mobility that are conducting this analysis, but I'll also mention that we're doing the same thing on sustainability strategies, technology strategies, housing affordability, and various other things. So we've asked these consultants to look at good, better, and best scenarios. So there would be a baseline scenario that's just typical development in the region, good that would have really nice enhancements, better additional enhancements, and best would be kind of taking cutting edge worldwide and applying everything to this area. So they've evaluated really hundreds of potential strategies and mixes in these scenarios and tried to determine what functions best in terms of cost and performance and cost per trip reduced. They identified kind of 4 scenarios. The first and the last were kind of bookends. The first was low cost, really kind of doing more than is typical, but not a lot more. And then the maximum was doing the best in all of these areas, with a couple of middle ground scenarios as well that try to find the sweet spot between cost and impact. You can see there that each of these concepts and scenarios is a mix of different good, better, and best strategies that provide benefits to the public and to the residents in the area. The recommended scenario was that third scenario. It's a better scenario, kind of a better plus is what we're calling it. This has many of the strategies that are found in very few places around the world, kind of top notch. We're not sure that there's a place anywhere that has this combination of strategies. We think that taken together, this really puts us on the world map for forward-thinking active transportation. And I won't go through all the details, but you can see there's kind of a range of different elements in each of these categories that we're looking at including. So looking at the capital cost, this isn't cheap. This is not something that's easily done, and there will have to be an investment. But what we found is that with about a $20 million capital cost above what baseline standards would be, we can achieve a total economic benefit of over $54 million. Now that comes in the form of reduced parking at the site. So if people can get around easily, if they don't need as many vehicles, we can have fewer parking stalls. We all know how expensive those are. We know how expensive the land is. So there's a real savings to the community based on those parking and land savings, where that resource can be put to more productive use. In terms of annual O&M, same kind of thing. We think that scenario would have a little over $7 million annual O&M cost, but in terms of reduced congestion, health benefits, cost savings to individuals, there would be a return of almost $27 million. We've broken down the costs and the benefits by responsible parties. And so we think a lot of this, the O&M, would be paid for through an association fee. So you think of an association that would maintain and operate the facilities, and there would be, almost like an HOA fee that would be put on the properties each year. It turns out to be not very expensive on a per unit and per person basis, and allows that to develop. Vertical developers would have to put in some funding, but they would also get some benefits in terms of reduced parking. Same with the horizontal developers who would have more land available for other uses. And then the land authority, this is kind of the state, would have amortized capital cost over time, but these are the societal benefits, the over $26.7 million that have been calculated. This is kind of how that money plays out and where those benefits come from. Consultants have calculated that would have 2.2 million fewer vehicle trips each year in this region. Save $52 million from building less parking. 3 million in annual savings from reduced congestion. So that's more time that people get back. That congestion has challenges for our air quality. So by being able to move people around better, their health savings, more physical activity, more walkability. And then importantly, 16 million in savings to households. So they're driving less, they're owning fewer vehicles. Let me just step back. I've kind of focused on the mobility pieces, but this is an economic session. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the economic returns expected from this site. We had the Ken Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah conduct a study of what the economic and fiscal benefits of this project would be at build out. If you want to see a detailed version of this study, please go to our website. It's thepointutah.org, and you can read all of the details. But the big picture items are that by build out, which we're assuming would be about 2048, would have 46,500 jobs at the site, over almost 4.4 billion in annual household earnings, and 7 billion in annual GDP contribution to the state. That obviously is significant, and that's in today's dollars. I think more relevant and more telling is comparing those numbers to the baseline. So there are some who would suggest, and reasonably so, that an appropriate approach would be to put up for sale signs around this site and sell the land to the highest bidder and let that developer build based on market conditions, which essentially would be what you'd see in the area. That is the baseline scenario that they analyzed. Then the framework scenario was looking at these plans that we've put together and what would happen based on developing out that framework plan. Now the baseline develops much quicker in terms of build out, but overall you can see that there are about 5 times the benefits under the framework relative to the baseline. So, maybe the numbers will change based on the market, based on assumptions, but I think there's no question that you can say, if we think ahead, if we're thoughtful about this project, we can create greater benefits and returns for the people of the state. That includes, revenues that go to building infrastructure and educating our children and providing social services that we need. So we're looking forward to this being really, I think, kind of a special place in terms of where we go from here. We anticipate that the inmates will be moved from the existing facility to the new correctional facility, probably in June or July. We'll start some demolition of the site shortly after that and be able to start putting in the horizontal infrastructure later in 2023, start seeing vertical in 2024. But we want this to be a place that people of Utah love, that are proud of, where they can gather and enjoy being together, go to restaurants, see street performances, go to theaters, where there are great high quality jobs, careers that are world-class, so our young people don't have to go somewhere else to have top-notch international careers, and a great place to live. So we're looking forward to it. This is not done. We anticipate many more conversations, and we invite you to participate in those conversations with us. So I think with that, I'll wrap up and be happy to respond to questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alan. As you all can see, the point is Utah's generational opportunity, and active transportation has been a key consideration from day one. Our team at X Factor has just really appreciated working with Alan and the Land Authority over the past couple of years. As Alan mentioned, we've engaged with over 10,000 Utahns through surveys, open houses, working group meetings, and what we heard from the public has been directly reflected in the plan for the site, including key signature features like that river to range concept that Alan had mentioned. So active transportation will continue to be a key consideration, especially as it relates to what this will mean for not only the local economy and statewide economy, but how this puts Utah on the map globally. So, Alan, thanks for making the point, both literally and figuratively. I have just a quick question for you as the moderator, and then we'll open it up to our attendees as well. Feel free, folks, to submit your questions directly in the chat. You also have the ability to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question verbally. So we want to open it up here for the next 15 minutes with our remaining time. So the point, Alan, will be a game changer. We're dubbing this Utah's innovation community, and rightly so, right? We are at the heart of Silicon Slopes. It's right in the middle of Utah's two most populous counties, as well as the largest labor sheds, high growth area, well served by vital transportation. As you mentioned previously with the prison, we hadn't really been thinking about access to the site. So going forward, you're really kind of incorporating a lot of best practices when it comes to transportation, and active transportation in particular, for how we're thinking about planning this going forward. So can you elaborate a little bit more on how active transportation had factored into kind of the land authority's thinking about our country's newest 15-minute community?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we think that this site only works really if we have active transportation. As you know, there are already some transportation challenges in the broader Point of the Mountain region. This site will bring more activity to the area. And so all of these strategies that we've talked about collectively reduce congestion or traffic use or vehicle miles traveled by almost half. And that's going to be really important as we move ahead, specifically on the active transportation piece. Now, what a great site. There's so many wonderful regional trails in this area, but there aren't that many places where you can connect to, for instance, the Jordan River Parkway Trail over to some of the trails on the east side. So this river to range connection will be wonderful for that. It'll promote some of the commuting that we think is important. We hope that people in the surrounding areas will take bikes or scooters or hoverboards or whatever it is in the future and access the site that way. We think it's really important for connecting and promoting transit. It's important for health. I mentioned early on that we want this to be a bit of a demonstration project, kind of a model for what future development in the area might be. And so some of those goals that we've heard from the public are fewer air emissions. We want people to be healthier. We want to reduce the costs of living in Utah that's becoming increasingly expensive. Those are the goals. The 15-minute city is a vehicle to achieve those goals. And so it's a planning framework, it's a planning principle that we use to really try to make life better for the people, not just that live here, but live in surrounding areas.
Perfect, thank you. And we are getting some questions here in the chat. So let me just ask a couple. Matt Gray asks, where could someone drive a car share vehicle to? Is it within the site or throughout the region or both?
It's both. So it'd be like a rental car, usually a shorter term than you might get going down to your neighborhood rental car place. But yeah, you could take it, do a trip, do a business meeting, whatever it is that you want to do throughout the region. So think of it as any rental car, but usually shorter term.
We want people out of their cars, right? So Mike West with Lehigh City asks, this project is really promising and includes some great features. Is there a way a guy like me could provide suggestions, feedback on more of the details, especially involving active transportation?
Yeah, we want input. As I said, this is kind of a community project, and I'm not the smartest guy, but I'm smart enough to know that I don't have all the answers and our team doesn't have all the answers. So we do welcome input. And there are various vehicles. Maybe the easiest one is to go to our website. Again, it's thepointutah.org. And there's a place there to provide comments. There are contact information where you can send in texts or even call, but we would welcome that input. And Muriel, you're the expert on all of this. Anything you'd add?
Yeah,
I know you're the
those calls
moderator,
go
but
to.
it's only fair for me to turn things around on you once in a while.
Oh, I think I'm having issues with my audio. Yeah, no, absolutely. Please feel free to get in touch with our team. We very much welcome your input and feedback. As Ellen mentioned, we recognize that, while we have great resources and great consultant teams, there's always more to learn. And we want to make sure that what we're doing at the site is reflective of what Utahns say they want. So as Alan mentioned, and I drop in the chat, our website is a great resource for additional information. And we have a number of ways you can get in touch with us. If you call that number, it gets to a real person on my team. We also have an email address, a newsletter. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're out there. So
yeah, sign up for that newsletter and we'll contact you monthly and give you an update on what's going on and keep you up to speed.
So Hugh Van Wagenen with WFRC asks, I love the perspective that this is a demonstration project for the future of mobility and active transportation as part of that future. What challenges, if any, do you see with current transportation culture preventing a better mobility future? I think that's a perfect question, especially after your presentation, Alan, and then for those of you who saw Jeff Speck's presentation earlier in the morning about walkability and some of the challenges associated with that.
Yeah, and Hugh, thanks for the question and thanks for all you've contributed to this project. If you don't know, Hugh's with WFRC and runs a lot of their active transportation efforts and has been really helpful to us as we've thought through this project. But you're right, it's one thing to have the strategies, the infrastructure in place. It's another to get people to use it. And we do have a culture here of driving, single occupancy vehicle use, et cetera. And, I think we recognize it's going to take a little bit of time to get people to use these strategies. But the key seems to be to make them convenient and affordable. And so we're working with UTA on potential discounts on some of these transit options. We're looking to bring them together. Maybe one of the things that I didn't emphasize before, but we mentioned that we're starting with kind of that mid-level strategy or scenario. I want to emphasize we're starting with that and hope that over time we can move more and more toward that best in every category. But cost is always a factor. Building the ridership and the interest and educating people on the various modes is going to take a little bit of time. So we see it as a work in progress. But we want to start off with things that people may have not seen in our region before. So I think once people have the opportunity, once they see how these pieces can work and fit together, that it can be convenient, I fully anticipate that ridership and participation will grow. We'll have to do some education, not just build it and they will come, but do some outreach as well. And that's part of the process we're going through now and will. So thank you, Hugh, for what you're doing and for that question. And I'd welcome any input you have over time on how we can change that culture.
Another potential constraint that we're mindful of is asked by Austin Taylor. He says, I wonder if parking levels that financiers look for will be a barrier to single car development in the suburban area. Do you want to speak to that, Alan?
Yeah, again, that's a really good question. We're in the middle of the process to select our phase 1 development partners. And it's a months long, highly competitive, robust process to try to get the right partner. We want somebody, some team that has experience on these kinds of future focused projects, that cares very much about Utah. One of the things that we're asking them to do is provide a parking plan. And in our early conversations, we know that many are looking at it in different ways. Some that applied said, we want to get to structured parking, but we're going to have to start with surface parking and evolve into that as the market evolves. Others have said, we think that there are strategies available now where we go straight to structured parking. That's what we're pushing for. We know that we're going to have to be firmly rooted in practical market realities. But frankly, building the surface parking and hoping that it changes over time creates sometimes many, many years of maybe an incomplete development or a development that doesn't achieve all that we want. We think that we may have to look at ways to supplement the funding of some of these strategies. So if they're above market, we may need to look at ways that we can advance the market or accelerate the market at this site. We think that the value of the land here is going to be high enough that it will command higher rents and therefore be able to help pay for some of the structured parking and other parking strategies. One of the things that we're looking at is the design of that structured parking. We want to do it with flat roofs, design it so that that parking structure could be turned into office or residential in the future if parking needs go down. When we start having the air taxis, which are probably not that far off, we can use the roofs of those parking garages as vertiports, places where they can land and take off safely. So much of this strategy, as I mentioned before, is built around flexibility. Not doing things today that constrain options, but doing things that preserve options in the future.
Very well put, Alan, especially when you're talking about, a large scale development where you're looking out decades in advance. So if we don't have any more questions, we do have a little bit more time. So if you want to maybe kind of speak to, you mentioned where we're at in the process in selecting through this, very competitive process, a future development partner, and kind of what some next steps are with the point.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we issued an RFP in December for the development partner and had some pretty high standards. We sent it out all over the country and we had 9 teams that applied. These are household names in the development world. And I think each of the teams was a really strong combination of national and local ability. We evaluated those applications in detail against a set of criteria. They were scored on those criteria. We did interviews, and I guess last week our board voted to carry 3 of those teams forward into phase 2. So phase 2 is going to involve much more detailed analysis, a lot more information. We sent that list of information yesterday. We'll have a series of workshops with these teams and ultimately entertain their proposals in June. And then the board will make a final decision. Then we'll be working on developer agreement and planning a little bit further this site. And we expect that they're going to bring some ideas to the table that we haven't had yet. And we'll be able to help us make some improvements. And that's all important. Maybe another piece that I'll mention, we were talking about the plan for this site, but we also want it to be really iconic. And the governor and members of the legislature and others really would like to see iconic features at this site. And So we likely will have design competition to think about, what's Utah's version of the Eiffel Tower or whatever it might be that will make this potentially a tourist destination, as well as an innovation center where new ideas are generated. Another key piece of all of this is that innovation district. The legislature has provided some funding to the Utah system of higher education to develop an innovation district at the Point. Now, that's a place where there's fundamental research done, where there's programming to get people from different disciplines together, sharing new ideas. There are mentors, seed capital available, accelerators, and ultimately assisting us developing ideas that can be commercialized, that create new businesses, that solve problems in our community. So that's going to be an important piece. We're having ongoing conversations with some companies that would like to have corporate headquarters here, life science campus that would be world-class. So lots of opportunities coming up. As I said, you'll start to see activity on the site this year. And that's kind of exciting. We'll be spending, again, the latter half of this year getting the site ready for development. So it's an exciting time. There's been a lot of thought that's gone into it, more to come. But maybe one other thing I'd say is I talked about phase one. Phase one is going to be kind of the central hub of the project. There will be a mix of uses. It will surround the Central Park and part of that River to Range Trail. And we expect probably some higher density buildings than you've seen on the framework plan that would go in there. So we think it's important to get it right from the beginning, set the tone, create some excitement. So that's the plan. There are certainly challenges, transportation among them, developing in a way that uses less water is a big piece, being more energy efficient. But all those things we're addressing in an analytical way.
Thank you so much, Alan. Well, hopefully we answered that question for you guys today on what's the point. Thanks again for joining us. And please feel free to get in touch with us if you have any other questions. We would love to engage with you as we go forward. So